Will the aldermen please take their seats? Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 2024-2025 Board of Aldermen budget deliberations. Today is Wednesday, April 17th, 2024, and we are here to continue the department presentation portion of the 2024-2025 automatic budget process. This evening, we will be hearing from the Board of Education. Will everyone please stand up and join me as we salute our flag? Madam Secretary, will you please take the roll?
Alderman Archiola.
Present.
Alderman Beatty.
Present.
Alderman Bevan. Here. Alderman Casey.
Here.
Alderman Federico.
Here.
Alderman Fowler.
Here.
Alderman Healy. Here. Alderman Jenkins. Here. Alderman Marlowe.
Here.
Alderman Morenin.
Here.
Alderman Pacelli. Alderman Smith. Alderman Vitro.
Here.
Alderman Vitale. Alderman Willis.
Here.
All are present.
15 present. Thank you, Madam Secretary. We do have a quorum. Is there a motion to come out of recess?
So moved. Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to come out of recess. All in favor? Opposed? We are out of recess. Does the Board of Education have a presentation for us this evening? You can begin at any time.
All right, is this on now? Very good. Thank you and good evening, Alders. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you tonight the Board of Education 24-25 operating budget. So I'd like to just begin with a brief overview of our own budget process. So the elected Board of Education begins with its formal budget work at our September and October meetings, when we review and adopt budget assumptions and priorities that help guide the superintendent in the development of her budget.
Jesus.
She presents her proposal to us in January, and the board members then vet and discuss it with her during a series of usually 3 budget workshops before adopting our final plan. So our budget actually gets more scrutiny than any other department in the city because it has to pass muster with the elected Board of Education first. But beyond that, we actually spend the entire year leading up to that point discussing district needs and initiatives, giving feedback on future plans that might have budget impact, and reviewing current monthly and quarterly budget reports. We typically hold 22 public meetings a year, most of them have some type of report or instructional presentation that in some manner is reflected in our budget. So there are no surprises for us in January. As we look forward to the 24-25 budget year, we are still faced with the lingering effects of the pandemic, inflation, contractual obligations, specialized programming, and mandates. These same issues are being felt in school districts across the state and the nation, and in Connecticut, I've seen from my colleagues budget requests that continue to increase beyond what we have typically seen. I will point out that over $450,000 in savings were identified across categories in this budget to offset increasing costs. And within that context, the board looks to support as efficiently as possible the needs of students and staff so they will thrive in Milford Public Schools. We believe a 21st century learning experience is integral to the success of today's young people. This budget request emphasizes student choice and voice in their learning through new opportunities such as the addition of American Sign Language as a middle school world language option and enhanced investments in technology. The creation of a popular CIAC-sanctioned esports team at our high schools, just to name a few. The greatest impact on student learning is an engaging teacher and rigorous, relevant curriculum. And this budget continues to support teacher agency with funding for appropriate professional learning to help them grow and bring their best selves to the classroom every day. It can't be stated enough that our collective staff of 1,000 plus is our greatest asset. And if you've listened over the years, you've heard it said many times that education is a people business. I believe generally our community has demonstrated in many different ways that it supports the current work being done in Milford Public Schools. Overall, the programs, curriculum, and resources represented in this budget will give our young people the best opportunity to succeed in the future of their choice, whether it's continuing their education at a university or a technical school, learning a trade, or entering the workforce or the military. But we also recognize that every dollar in this budget is an investment in our community so that Milford will continue to be a place where kids love going to school and where young families will want to call home. So with your support, we can continue the progress and the commitments made in previous years to help Milford be the best it can be. So thank you for your attention tonight in advance, and Dr. Cutaia will get into the details with you, and then we can take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, members of the board. I am always grateful to come before you. Grateful that yet again I can come before you to talk to you about the proposed budget that is before you, but more importantly, to talk to you about the story that this budget represents. More importantly, to talk to you about the plans that this budget represents numerically for our young people and staff members. But before I dive into the nuts and bolts of this budget, I thought it would be good to start with some good news. I thought it would be a good idea for us just to spend a little bit of time on the multitude of accomplishments and celebrations that I get the great benefit to know about day by day because of the work I do. And I'm just not going to assume that you as a board or even our community know all of the great news. So for just a couple of minutes over the next 3 slides, I want to talk about the great work of our students and staff. The really good work that Milford Public Schools is doing. So I'll start from the top left corner and work my way over. Pictures here demonstrate Fox News at Foreign High School providing a spotlight on what's right in schools. Our high school being spotlighted on the news this year as one of the high schools demonstrating what's going right in school. Here's also a picture of our news cast here on Fox 61. Our journalism students are receiving an award for their work in journalism class. Every year, PTA Council, the Connecticut PTA Council, honors outstanding staff members, educators, and paraprofessionals and parents every year. Out of 9 staff members in the 2023 year, 3 of those individuals work in Milford Public Schools. 3 out of 9 work for us as outstanding educators recognized by PTA Council. In the upper right corner, you'll see our students engaging in real-world issues in Model UN. Our high schoolers have an opportunity to engage in real-world relevant issues in class. And finally, 4 of our very best teachers, who have been with us a long time, applied for and received a fellowship for this upcoming summer so that they can travel and learn more about their craft. They can travel and learn more to become better teachers. Not many teachers across the nation could say they received that fellowship, but 4 of our teachers in Milford did. In the upper left corner are featured our 4th graders hosting a public forum, an expo, on the studies they conducted this year to propose to school leaders, even the mayor, what alternative forms of energy could be utilized, all because we invested in STEM labs at the elementary schools. We had Electrify Your Choir here, where students from grades 5 through 8 participated in a really exciting and exhilarating experience. Milford Public Schools was the only school district in the state of Connecticut to host Electrify Your Choir this year. They're highly selective to where they go across the nation. And for the 4th year in a row, congratulations, Milford. We've been recognized as one of the best communities for music education. A distinct honor that we can be so proud of. Our very own Anthony Vitelli being recognized by his association for all of his years of work as an athletic director. SEC scholars were recognized this year, and 3-time state champion wrestler Kelly Aspris being recognized this year. Our very own Olivia Soleil, student at Foreign, being recognized as the Connecticut Journalist of the Year. Social studies teacher at Foreign, Austin Caesar, receiving the Instructional Award from UConn for participating in the ECE program. We engage in a community conversation with business leaders and students, asking them, what do we need to do to better prepare you for the work world? Annually, we engage in a veteran celebration where we invite veterans into our classrooms so our little people can understand and appreciate the sacrifices made by our veterans and seniors. And finally, on this slide, our students participating in the Business Leaders of America competition and receiving numerous awards. And lastly, in the form of pictures for celebrations, this is a proud point for me. 150-ish teachers chose to give 6 days of their summer vacation to spend it with us to develop their craft in teaching, to work on developing their skill set at becoming better teachers, learning from our very own teachers, not consultants and experts across the nation, but our very own and our very own students. Out of 400 graduates last year, we're proud to say that 168 graduated with honors. Last year, we had 140 students named AP honors, some of them with AP scholars, some of them with honors, and some of them with distinction. And while we celebrate every graduate's decision to enter the work world, to enter the military, to take a gap year, to go to school locally at a tech school, a community college, a state college, we also know that we're meeting the needs of all of our children and able to get our students to apply for and be admitted to some of the top tier universities in the nation. You see Harvard listed there, Yale, UPenn, BU, MIT, Rensselaer. That's something to be very, very proud of. That's an accomplishment of the entire system, and in my eyes, of an entire city that has supported an educational system. To me, those are big signs of a return on investment when we look at budgets. But that's a little bit of the right now. If you'll indulge me, I want to talk to you about the unique process that I engaged in this year in developing our budget. And that requires us to go back in time a little bit. So I'll have you look at this picture. The first graduating class depicted in this slide on the left is from 1950. I won't ask anyone if they recognize themselves or others in these pictures. But I got to thinking in developing the proposed 24-25 budget before you. I thought as an instructional leader, I'd really like to get my head wrapped around the notion of where have we been as a school system for the last 20 years in budget, but also in programming. I wanted to best understand, where do our plans today and in the future fit into the bigger picture of excellence, progress, and innovation for Milford Public Schools? So why don't you walk with me to the year 2005 for a minute. In 2005, literally, this is what I did to get this information. I walked down into the bowels of central office, into the filing cabinet room, and just started pulling out budget books, going way back. And I started looking at superintendent letters, I started looking at Board of Education chair letters, I started looking at the numbers and the planning in there. So this is just some highlights from those budget books, literally coming from budget books. In 2005, the superintendent and Board of Ed at the time, they were prioritizing things like performance promises. Now, we don't use that language anymore, and you'll see a lot of this language, while different, is actually kind of the same. We call that the vision of the learner, or Board of Ed goals today. Back in 2005, they were grappling with graduation requirements, and are they rigorous enough for our students to meet the demands of a work world? Back in 2005, they were talking about professional learning, how to continue to develop the skill set of our teachers. And they were even focusing on effective instructional strategies. You know what that is? Continuing to help teachers get better at teaching. You know what we call that today? HQI. High quality instructional practices. There it is, 20 years ago, just in a different way. 2009, we see on the scene at that time conversations and priorities around safety and security. The diverse and unique academic programming needs of all students is what was at the front of the conversation back then. They had a curriculum renewal cycle, so do we. We have a 6 to 7 year renewal cycle of all curriculum to ensure that we continue to be rigorous and relevant for our students learning today. They were talking about professional development in 2009 and also entering into conversations about alternative education. 2012, again, priorities around rigorous and quality education. Continuing to develop the skill set of teachers, focusing on partnerships, continuing to focus on safety and security. The renewal of computer leases were a priority, arts and athletics. 2014, only 10 years ago, a greater priority on preschool, more school security, an increased need for special education supports, and we see that trend continuing today. A conversation, a community conversation similar to what we did this year in the fall. At that time, that conversation was, what should the high school graduate look like? What are we working toward in Milford in 2014? And look at that, a focus on the instructional core. In a few slides, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the instructional core and how important it is to improving a school system. In 2017, we see the entry of this conversation about career pathways, and we'll talk more about that tonight and the future of that in Milford Public Schools. Business and world language labs, Chromebooks, and thank God someone was talking about Chromebooks in 2017 because we sure needed them in 2020. And a focus on summer learning. So I spent some time in that filing cabinet room, and I walked away with some conclusions and understandings. That one, the plan that we are developing and that we were developing at the time and is before you today, is only a continuation of the good work in Milford Public Schools. It's nothing that I have created or imagined alone. That I have the great fortune of standing on the shoulders of giants in 2024. I come after great instructional leaders and Board of Education members, and I see our role today in proposing this budget as a continuation of excellence, progress, and innovation. That this budget is part of a history and will be part of a future. As this budget is part of a legacy that comes before us, I believe this budget could be a legacy that we pay forward. But today, we continue to build a budget based on Board of Education commitments. Commitments that were adopted by our board in 2021. These commitments are forward-thinking. They require us to reflect on supports for all of our learners, young and older. Our Board of Ed also adopted goals in 2021. That's what we align our budget to. And in October of every year, as mentioned by Ms. Glennon, the board considers and adopts priorities and assumptions that are responsive to the current needs and the environment within which we're building a budget. And finally, the mark of a good school system ensures that there are some anchor documents or anchor work that you go back to every time. And if you've been at these presentations from me, this looks familiar. It is consistent. We are not changing course every year. We're not changing our mind. We are about the vision of the learner for all kids, regardless of ability and background. We're about high-quality instructional practices. The continuation of looking at getting better is a good way to summarize that. Because we know there are educational advancements today as there are in other fields. We're about relationships. The DRF, or Developmental Relationships Framework, has been part of our work for a long time, and we consider it the foundation of the work. And a newer part of our work is our commitment to the equity framework, to ensure that every child has a place of belonging in our community. Well, by looking back and considering how to move forward, I thought to myself, how did those that came before me, and how do I, as the superintendent of schools, know that we're working toward an effective organization, an educational organization? And I don't have to sit here before you to make up that answer. Actually, it comes out of research from people who are much smarter than I am. I went into the research, and I'm not going to read this list to you. But I propose that you will see all throughout this budget our efforts to continue to become the most highly effective educational organization that we can be. You will see budget items that point to a clear and focus with high expectations for staff and students. You will see in our discussions about programming and hear evidence that we have a rigorous instructional program, that we believe in belonging for all, we believe in instructional leadership, we believe in providing teachers with professional development and opportunities to collaborate. We also believe we can't do it alone and we need partnerships, and we have to, especially today in 2024, allow for student voice. So when I look to the research for what makes up an effective school system, I start to consider, what does that look like in Milford? And I'm going to invite you to look at that question through the lens of a superintendent just for a couple of minutes. I'm going to let you into my thinking. And I have two lenses when we're considering systemic improvements. Because sometimes we lean into one lens more than another. So let me explain to you the first lens. Everywhere in teacher prep school, in principal prep school, in superintendent prep school, we talk about this thing called the instructional core. This is lens one for me as superintendent. That if I want to improve student outcomes, we have to influence and impact one of these three things. It is the interaction between teacher and student around curriculum. That is the money shot. That's it, right there. And that's what you have to improve. You have to improve the experience for students and ensure that they are engaged in a rigorous way, so you have to constantly be updating curriculum so that it's relevant. And we have to constantly be supporting teachers to help them develop their knowledge and skill set. And in Milford, that triangle is happening in 485 classrooms. We have 485 learning spaces. Now you know what kind of challenge that could be, right? If you have 4 or 5 kids at home, you know how difficult it is to get them all on the same page. The larger the organization, the harder it is to ensure alignment and coherence. We have this engagement, this core occurring 485 times. So let me just let you into the second lens. That in order for that to happen at its highest level, you need a district that supports the classroom with systems, structures, and conditions, creating the right conditions, ensuring policies are in place, that protocols and procedures, the right professional learning is being provided, the right instructional leadership, opportunities for teachers to expand their learning, opportunities for parents to be engaged. That is the district responsibility of supporting the core. It's a double lens when we're trying to improve a system. And it's those two lenses that we consider in building a budget. You will see all throughout this budget proposals that are student-centered, that are teacher-centered, that are curriculum-centered, but also focus on the system. Because one of the directives I was given upon hire is to focus on tightening things up and make sure we are coherent across the system. That all second grade teachers are teaching from a common curriculum, not ones that are self-selected. That all freshman English teachers are teaching from a common curriculum, not one that is self-selected. And that we continue to support teachers so they can be the best they can be. So that got me thinking that there are a lot of educational advances today. Now don't get me wrong, 3 times 3 will always be 9. There's no changing that. We will always want our young people to know their basic math facts, to read, to have their basic literacy skills, phonics and phonemic awareness and ability to comprehend and write. But there's much more that needs to happen in a classroom today that maybe wasn't occurring a long time ago, I'll say. And it got me thinking, surely there are other fields that experience this growing pain, right? Well, I'm thinking the medical field may have seen some advances. I don't know if you're looking at this picture. I'm guessing that's like a 1960 photo on the left. And I know that I'm searching for doctors online, specialty doctors, and I'm bringing up their resumes and their bios, and I'm calling people and saying, how good is that doctor? And I'm asking when's the last time he went to training on the latest advancements in their field. And while mathematics hasn't changed, our understanding of how the brain is much more sophisticated, how it works. Our understanding of how students learn and consume and process information has advanced. And I'll tell you, I graduated from college in 1999. There are a lot of new advancements, a lot of new research in the area of education that I have to keep up with. How about the field of manufacturing? That has changed significantly. In fact, I just read an article last week on how our schools still today in 2024 very much feel like a factory model high school, where we are giving all kids same opportunities, expecting the same expectations of all kids. And actually, funny story, it got me thinking about my mother. And my mom, immigrant to this country, was a seamstress by trade. She went and worked in the factory every day. And she worked on dresses, female dresses. And she tells us to this day that her only job was to make a certain part of the dress. That's all she did all day for 5 days a week. There was one expectation and one outcome for her. And I'm assuming that that was the case in some of the type of work back then. But the workforce has changed. There isn't one outcome for all kids. And the business world has changed. It looks different, it functions differently. The work that you're in, I'm sure, has progressed over time. And surely that applies to education today. Our classrooms don't look the same. They don't function the same. Our kids' needs aren't the same. I've been before you before, last year in particular, saying our kids are not okay. that they have many more mental health issues than ever before. We're dealing with very specialized needs of students that require specialized training. And there are more and more demands coming our way. The reading legislation, the science and reading, is one example of that. It's requiring an adoption of all new resources and all new training. Imposed on us, not by choice. It got me hopeful though, because currently in our high schools, we're offering career pathways to make a difference so that we're not, as that article mentions, a factory model high school. That we are being responsive to today's workforce. That we are providing our students experiences that are hands-on, that require basic skills, but also require higher level thinking. Those are the three pathways we currently offer. This budget before you supports these next two pathways. But the more exciting part is we have big plans. Look at the plans over the next few years. We have big programming plans for our kids. We know even in the world of restaurant and food and beverage management that has changed. So it leads me to think about looking backward, looking at today, and looking forward. But I think the question before us is, what do we want for the kids in Milford? What do we want for our students? You know, our current kindergarten class, they'll be the class of 2035. I'm not really sure what that world's going to look like in 2035. I'm not sure what the jobs are going to be. I'm not sure what the role of AI will be or robots. But I know one thing for sure. I want to work with us to ensure that we have a school system that prepares our kids for whatever they are going to face. And create a system, continue to build a system that is flexible and responsive and includes educational advancements in our plans. So let's talk about how this proposed budget in front of you does that. The proposed Board of Education budget before you is in the amount of $111,285,770, which represents a 4.7% increase. I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about the numbers, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. So every year I talk with our community about what are the primary drivers, and as Ms. Glennon already mentioned, we are a human capital-driven industry. If you want to improve programming, it is likely it requires people. That's how we deliver our services. And about 77% of our budget is made up of salaries and benefits. This proposed budget in front of you includes the last of a 3-year plan to roll over 4 counselors that we, with intention, baked into our ARPA funds, that we at the time already had a plan to include counselors at the elementary school, but this allowed us to accelerate that plan. And rather than creating a funding cliff today, as many of school districts across the state of Connecticut are faced, we responsibly plan that over 3 years. You'll also see that, and there's more detail in your budget book, that this budget represents a net increase of 2 certified staff members after we made some reductions across the system and 6.3 non-certified positions. Additionally, this budget before you includes some specialized programming to support the very special needs of some of our young people. Specifically, we'd like to add 2 programs at the elementary level. While we have needs at the other levels, we thought we would start with elementary, so that you can anticipate us talking to you next year about middle and high. That we were going to include a behavioral support program and a specialized instruction program. This allows us to actually be efficient in our spending. It allows us to provide instructional support to students in district rather than entertaining placing them at a district at very high tuition and transportation costs. So while this is an expenditure, it is actually a long-term savings so that we're not sending students at a district at high tuition and transportation. And our preference is really to keep our students in district. Additionally, we require some more behavioral supports in the form of a BCBA, a Board Certified Behavior Analyst. And we'd like to extend what we're doing with Bridges. Bridges obtained a 5-year grant to put a clinical therapist in 3 of our schools, the Academy, Law, and West Shore. But we have found that we actually have the need at Harborside, East Shore, and Foreign. So this budget proposes the placement of 3 clinical therapists through Bridges. We have an increase in tuition and contracted services, particularly in special education. We have increased, if you look at the line items, increased in school facilities, the maintenance and upkeep of grounds and facilities. Our zero-based budgeting has tightened the ability to provide those line items additional support at end of year spending like used to occur, but because of zero-based budgeting, every line item is very, very tight. So we have intentionally increased our investment in those areas. You may have heard that the CIAC has changed its rules, that now athletes can practice and be coached and they can be conditioned over the summer. So that, of course, requires us to pay those coaches and athletic directors to come in over the summer and allows our athletes to be competitive. So if we don't offer that to our athletes, they would be at a disadvantage compared to other school districts who are providing that summer support. And you need to believe that other school districts are jumping on that opportunity. And finally, we have contracted increases in the area of transportation. As far as system improvements are concerned, this is the kind of stuff that gets me really excited about the next steps in programming, the part of standing on the shoulders of giants for us to continue to leave a legacy of excellence. There's so many things that we're excited about that is supported by the increase. As Ms. Glennon mentioned, we are honoring the voice of middle schoolers. We've asked and they've spoken. We asked, what languages would you like to take? And our first response is, great. We will offer American Sign Language next year as an option. As you know, I'll remind you that we are one of the few school districts in the state of Connecticut that offers a world language, kindergarten through 12th grade. So now our middle schoolers would have had 6 years of Spanish walking in after having those years in elementary school. So we're very excited about offering different choices. And we see ourselves expanding those options actually 6th through 12th grade in the future. In fact, my dream is to allow any kid to take any language they want, regardless of any limitations. We want to continue to build our repository of musical instruments. The tech ed piece here, the 3D printers, actually is to support a new course that we're going to offer in middle school, part of our career pathways. We're going to do an intro to engineering and manufacturing, starting in great.
Yeah, and then the information that I provided to the board here was solely reflective on increased opportunities. So I didn't, as Ms. Doyle mentioned, things that we've typically had year to year. I didn't really dig into those. I tried to give you opportunities.
In our journalism and tech ed classes at the high school. We're excited about a new esports team. CIAC does recognize the official esports competitive team. We've just started our club this week, actually, and we're hoping to launch at least one, if not 2 competitive teams, one at Law, one at Foreign next year. And we're hoping to start the replacement of the foreign band uniforms that are about in their 20th year of use. We just did those at Law recently. We hope to move over to Foreign to do that. And then district-wide, we're looking at replacement of servers and computers, security cameras, cybersecurity firewalls, and we are committed to continue to diversify our workforce, and we'll be in partnership with a local educational agency to bring in 2 teachers of residence, 2 teachers of color, to ensure that we have people in the teaching ranks that exemplify and emulate the students that are in our classrooms. This is the newly revised curriculum that will be implemented next year and supported by this budget. Too many to name, but know that we are on a 7-year curriculum revision cycle. We feel like 7 years is the right time, where it gives us research review, data collection, implementation, making changes, gathering information from teachers and students, and seeing what changes we need across the 7 years. So these are the renewals coming up next year. Additionally, Ms. Glennon pointed to the $460,000 that we were able to find throughout the budget building process. I have mentioned and have mentioned for a long time that we start with 0 every year. And there are some line items that are going to naturally ebb and flow. So see, these are some of the line items by our natural programming that were reduced in nature because of the current needs and programming for the school district. Budgetarily, this is a look at where these increases have been over the last 16 years. And the next 2 slides represent to you in 2 different visuals, depending on how you like to consume the information. A pie chart that breaks down visually by percentage, where the monies are allocated by category. You'll notice the salaries and benefits take up a majority of the pie. And this is just a chart that is more linear in nature, but represents the same information. So to close, I hearken back to the picture of the 1950s graduating class to today. And I ask that you consider this picture as maybe someone looking at it in 2044, a Board of Aldermen in 2044, a superintendent, a parent or an administrator, a Board of Ed chair, a citizen in the audience in 2044. What will they be able to say is the legacy that we left? I ask this Board of Aldermen to consider this budget not in isolation. That's easy to do. Let's just look at this 1 year at a time. Rather, I ask that you consider this budget as part of a bigger picture, as how it serves as part of our history and part of our future, on the legacy of excellence, innovation, and progress that we will leave for future individuals that will be here. Thank you for your consideration.
Happy to take questions.
Alderman Federico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, first of all, to Dr. Cutaia and the team, thank you for a very thoughtful presentation. I'm going to start out with a question directed to the Finance Director. I would like to just confirm a few figures. So I think it's important as we're looking at the budget to just clear up any misconceptions that the public has. So a speaker Monday night indicated that the Board of Ed budget would be even worse if the health insurance for Board of Ed employees were included. I have some figures I just want to walk through, and Mr. Aridisi, if you could confirm as I go through the math. Okay, so last year, the Board of Education budget was $106,290,134. And last year, the Board of Ed health insurance contribution was $24,276,586. Sorry to put you on the spot, but I just want to ensure that everyone knows that we align on the numbers.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Alderman Federico, yes, I believe the figure you cited for the contribution to the self-insurance fund for education was $24,276,586. 586.
Yes, yes. So if we combined those two, we would have 130 million, 566, 720. And just rough numbers, round numbers, so everybody can understand, I'll say $130 million, right? So 106 plus 24, 130 million in last year's budget. In this year's budget, as proposed by Dr. Cutaia and the Board of Education, we have 111 million in the education budget, 111 million 265 770, same number Dr. Cutaia showed us earlier. And the health insurance, I have 21 million 622 801. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Alderman, yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Okay, so again, in round numbers, if we added those, it'd be 111 million plus roughly 21 million, comes out to just about $133 million, 132,908,571. So that increase then is $2.3 million if the health insurance, and I fully understand it's not, I know that's the way we do it, but if the health insurance were included, then for this year's budget, the change would be an increase of $2.3 million, 133 minus 130.6 is $2.3 million, which is about a 1.8% increase. I say that because, you know, everyone focuses on the percentage increase, right? That's what grabs all the headlines, and everyone's been talking about this 4.7%, you know, on the Board of Education side, and nearly flat on the mayor's city side. And we're not going to talk about the city side tonight, but I think we need to unpack and go through the layers of what's in there as well, which we'll do in the coming meetings. Maybe, you know, if we take a step back here, I've worked in finance and accounting for 30 years. I spent 18 years at a company that had a self-insured plan, doing the finance and accounting for it. So this is second nature to me, but I know it's hard sometimes for the public to grasp. Can you explain a little bit about the self-insured plan and why we have such a big decrease this year?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Alderman Federico, just to give a brief overview, the health insurance fund for the city is dedicated to accounting for all the expenses related to health insurance. That includes the medical plan, the dental plan, et cetera. And this line item in the budget, along with a second line item in the employee benefits section, those two line items together represent the contribution that is needed from the general fund in order to balance the budget each year in the health insurance fund. Just like any other balanced budget, we have to look at the expenses and make sure we have equal revenues to fund them so that at least we have a balanced budget. And so each year our consultant working with their actuaries, they look at all of the claims data, they help us negotiate our stop loss premium, and they do an analysis as we work on the budget in order to help me as finance director come up with the we look at revenues from retiree cost share as well, et cetera. And so once all of those sources of revenues are projected, the difference is what is needed from the general fund. And in certain years, we've had to look at what the fund balance has been in the health insurance fund, similar to how we look at the fund balance in the general fund. And in certain years, we had to use some of that fund balance to help offset the increase that would have taken place in the general fund line items. So the accounting for this decrease is the fact that claims themselves have grown, but they haven't grown as fast in the last year. We had a savings from last year's operating results in the health insurance fund. And so looking at the fund balance, we use some of it again to offset the increase in the expense. And I'll end there and see if you have further questions. Thank you.
Do you have how much the savings was from last year?
Yes, the savings from last year was a little over $5 million in the health insurance fund balance. So we are using $4.5 million from that fund balance, and we split it 50-50 between the city and the education side in order to offset these line items. So that accounts for a big part of the decrease. Okay. And the other part I would add was we did negotiate savings, a lower rate of increase in the stop-loss premium, and that accounts for about $846,000. Thank you.
Thank you. So I've looked at the numbers again when the Board of Finance reduced the request from the Board of Education, and that would be a 0. I'm sorry, I printed this a little too small, a 0.8% increase. So we're talking now, if they were included, right, the education budget would look much better if the health insurance were included in this year's budget. Again, everyone focuses on how much is that percentage going up. So if it were included, we'd be talking about 1.8 from the superintendent and 0.8% after the Board of Finance cut. I know we had quite a few people here on Monday evening that used that 4.7% headline to kind of come forth and, critique the Board of Education. For any of you Seinfeld fans, it was like a Festivus, right? We had people here just airing their personal grievances against the school system as justification to override the Board of Ed's request. And I wanted to get this out as an early point in our discussion, because I wonder how many of those people would have come out if the headlines initially, if the health insurance were there, and the headline said 1.8. I don't know, but it's certainly not a worse result. With that, I'll yield back to the chairman. Thank you.
Alderman Vitale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Dr. Cutaia and Board of Education members and public school, it was a tremendous presentation, and your energy into it means a lot. But let me what got me was your class of 24, 28, and 32, and the future of the Board of Aldermen and everything else. So I think we have that today. Alderman Fowler, Alderman Jenkins, the mayor, and I was their principal years ago. So we have this picture right up here today, and I'm very probably, but I'm very proud of these guys because this is what we did. Whether it was in 2004 or 5 when I was at Harborside Middle School, or was it from 82 to 2004 when I was at Live Oak School. So that picture is presented today. I do have some follow-up questions that I will get into, but just to Alderwoman Federico's point, this is an excellent summary on the Appendix F, A18. If you look at it, all the numbers are there as to the total expenditures, the operational expenditures as was proposed was 111 plus, and all of the city contributions amounted to 31 plus, so that proposed budget for the Board of Education would be $142,745,930. So that would be the total total budget for the Board of Education if all of the city side was to be purported to the Board of Education and they needed to pay for those pieces. It's a very well laid out index. It tells you board of the student per pupil expenditure with the operational budget, then has the per pupil expenditure increases with the total amount of budget both on the city side and the Board of Education. So I just like to leave it at that point just to make that point, but this is a very good representation of the budget, the full budget on page A18, but I'll get back to the other questions later. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Point of clarification, I would just like to be referring to that, and I don't seem to have it. Alderman Vitale in front of me in the, you mentioned the appendix.
Under the appendix A18,
A18.
the tab would say appendix and
Yep,
getting,
yep.
and it's a well laid out expense sheet.
Yeah, his,
My book doesn't have the 24, 25 in it.
No, but the numbers are already, we found out what the numbers are, so we,
Right.
you fill in the blanks with the numbers through Peter, through the finance director. He can go through them or we can get them later on, but that total is about $31,460,160.
Which is still a roughly 2% increase year over year. 142 versus 139.
Mr. Chair, since there's no other questions, I might as well continue. Tremendous presentation. When we talk about high schoolers and we see on slide, I believe, 13 or 14, whatever those slides were, where they gave a representation of all of the colleges, Rensselaer, Yale, yada, yada, yada. I mean, we have those, we've done that. We've been there, we've done it. It's a different time, a different place, different student. And I appreciate everything that goes on to these, into what happens in the classroom. We all know it's a very intense, labor-intensive profession. In the slide where we saw the systematic improvement strategy, we have student engagement, teacher knowledge and skill, content rigor and relevance. Where the striving of past years was always in those areas. Plus we had a tremendous amount of parent involvement. So it's there, it's a different place, a different form, it looks a little different. We have to keep up with the times, obviously. I would like to just go back and get some information on student performance in lower grades. With the Smart Balance assessment, can you just talk about the Smart Balance assessment? I know if I compare it to what we did with CMTs, we used to have goal, proficiency, above goal, et cetera, and I don't know what the levels are, and I think I know what the levels are, but I'm not sure. So can you go over those? And I know our DIRG, we're in DIRG D, and I think there are about 24 municipalities or districts in DIRG D. And can you tell us where we rate in those, in that DIRG as with the other municipalities? So I'll leave it for further explanation for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Vitale, for that question. I'm afraid I didn't come prepared to talk about our student achievement. I don't have SBA scores in my budget book. I don't have them memorized on what our percentages are compared to 24 municipalities. But I could speak to them generally, if you'd like. And actually, we provide this information to Board of Education twice a year, every September, October-ish. We provide them with an update on how our students are doing on SBA and AP and SAT. And we also then we just provided the board an update on our district accountability report.
I have some, in the district profile, when we look it up and we talk about the district performance index, back in 21-22, we were scoring somewhere in the 60th percentile, 60% of our kids. So I don't know if that was in 22, and I have it in front of me. So.
I don't know that that's the appropriate way to depict that, though. I don't know that
Okay,
60th
so that's the
percentile is not the right depiction.
That's the important piece as to how it's
Yeah.
interpreted and how we look at it.
Yeah.
And so I would have liked to have known where we stand within the DIRG and what the other municipalities are spending per pupil expenditure as far as getting the biggest bang for their buck, I guess.
So the DIRGs, I don't know if you've heard, but the state of Connecticut has abandoned the DIRGs. I'm not sure when the last time they were updated, so I'm not confident that the DIRGs that you find online actually represent current economic conditions. So I'm not sure the validity of DIRGs any longer. But I can speak generally. I obviously wasn't prepared to do a student achievement presentation to the Board of Aldermen. I do that with my board twice a year. But I will tell you, and since you've been here a long time and have been an educator in Milford, you know, and I've shared this with the board numerous times, that our CMT scores were stagnant, flat. CMT scores were pretty, if you take a look at the 2013, 14, 15, 16 year, they were pretty flat.
And you know as well as I do, so if you go deep into the weeds, you know what schools were at the top of the CMTs and had good performance indicators at that particular point in time. And I'm proud to say that Live Oaks was one of the highest. But you know, that was an easy determination where we had the assessments, we knew where we were going. We had school goals, teachers' goals, and so the improvements that were made for the next possible year. But isn't the SBAT the state assessment piece that we really go by at this particular point in time?
Yes, and that's no different than the CMT.
Pardon?
That's no different than the CMT.
So it's basically...
SBA took the place of CMT.
Right.
And in fact, in the reference that I'm making in the years of 2013 to about 18-ish, you will see a rather flat performance of students on CMT, SBA, AP, SAT. This is a presentation I've done to the board a couple of times. So prior to going into the pandemic, we were pretty flat. We weren't making progress. And coming out of the pandemic, for the last 2 years at least, we're kind of flat. So there's areas for improvement there. So I'm not sure where you're going with this question because I'm not prepared to do a student achievement presentation.
Well, I would have gone to the point where if we knew what percentages we were getting from the smart balance assessments, that we would know what percentages were either at novice development or proficient or advanced, so we would know where the percentages were so we could talk a little bit better.
You said you had the performance and profile report in front of you?
Do I have what?
It seems like you have the performance
I
and
just
profile
have the
report.
test. I don't have... I have the levels, but I don't know where we are with the levels, so that would be an important question.
I'm prepared to answer budget questions, not student achievement. I'm sorry.
Okay, so student achievement would be extremely important to the core of the budget, also to know if we're getting the biggest bang out of our buck. There were some misconceptions the other night, and I applaud the parents that came out the other night. They did a fantastic job, and you know, you are your kids' best advocates at this point. The trend in this city over the last couple of years in the population of Milford has gone down by 2,000 people. I don't know if everybody's aware of that. So in 21, we had 52,000 plus people, and in 24, we had 50,471 people. So people were saying, well, people were moving to Milford in droves. It almost seemed like people were moving into Milford in droves, but it's not the case. We're losing people as we are losing kids in the education. You know, years ago, we had 13,000, 14,000 kids in the system with 21 elementary schools and 3 high schools. we're down to 5,220 kids with 8 elementary, 3, and 3. So there were a lot of cuts way back when. A lot of teachers were laid off in the 70s and going into other professions. So these are the kinds of things that I would be considering, you know, how we talk about student performance. And student performance is an extremely important piece here. So as I'm concerned with it, we know that, you know, 15% of our population is between 45 and 54 years old. So what relevance or what kind of, how many kids do they have in the school system? We have to look, and one of the other issues that came up the other night is that the city side does not scrutinize the budget as well as the Board of Education does with their budget. But it's true that all the departments go to the mayor with a number, and when they leave the mayor's office, it's a different number. So there was a lot of negotiations in those areas. But and the other thing that I would like to know, you had, if in fact the budget was only given if the Board of Education was only given the 3.14, whatever that amount is, and there were cuts that were going to be made to the Board of Education, will those cuts look the same in the finalization of the budget as they were proposed today? For instance, cutting of the instructional coaches and doing all of those kinds of things. And that's, maybe it's rhetorical to know that it's going to be a different cut, because obviously if the amount that was allocated to the Board of Education was the number of 3.4%, would it be a different cut in the line items than in the bottom, with the bottom line different than what it is today? That would be one of the questions. The other thing were that the instructional coaches, which seemed to have been the big thing the other night with cutting back on them. Can you in some way give us an idea of the day of the instructional coach?
Do you want me to answer your other question too? I mean,
if you remember them, you can
you
answer.
had a few in there.
Some are rhetorical, but you can, if I appreciate it.
So I just want to, clearly answer your questions tonight. So I think you asked about the cuts, the proposed reductions, and you held up a sheet that looked...
I don't know if we refer to them as cuts, but the allocation would be the, from what, the 7, one that was asked, 4 point...
So can you just hold up the document that you just did? Is it green and white?
Was
yeah, okay, thank
that you were going to make as the Board of... As a board.
All right, so I'll explain it. So we shared that with the Board of Education. We had about a week-ish turnaround time. We wanted to get a public dialogue going with what we were thinking about. So what we did was we took the strategy of keeping the system whole as it is today and only looking at possible reductions in what was above and beyond this year's system. So Mr. Alder Vitale, if you specifically go to my letter in the budget book, you'll note the one-to-one correlation primarily between what was proposed in system improvements and what's on that reduction list. And that reduction list represents first level thinking, if you will. That's like maybe 10 days after Board of Finance notified us of the reduction or voted on it, and we talked to our board, and we thought we would put something together so we could have a starting point of conversation. So to answer your question, we anticipate that changing. Okay? And since you've also been around a while, so, the conversation of instructional coaches isn't unfamiliar to you, actually. Because probably during your time with us, we had coaches. Coaches is not a new position in the district.
They are a new position since I retired, yes.
What year was that? Well, you don't want to talk about it?
07?
Okay. So they
Charlie knows.
They predate me. I came
well,
to the
they don't
district.
predate me.
But they predate me. So we've had instructional coaches in our buildings a long time. In fact, there were 2 instructional coaches, one for literacy, one for mathematics. And that role has evolved, actually. At one time, coaches did not do conduct direct work with students. Working with students is part of their day. I don't have a schedule to share with you, but I can also say that we moved to a different work of coaching. I wrote the year down. Let me just reference to my notes, because I knew you were going to ask me this, or somebody was.
I'm sorry, while you're doing that,
20
I'm so sorry to interrupt. We're getting a lot of feedback. I think it's because both microphones are on.
I'm so sorry, I didn't realize that.
No, it's all right.
There's no on and off button.
Don't see an on-off button.
I think it's back there, right?
I'm so sorry to derail the conversation.
When all else fails, unplug it. Okay. So in 21-22, we moved to this model of coaching. And actually, we weren't able to implement it because it was still a COVID year. And we experienced very high levels of absenteeism in 21-22. And we, in most elementary schools, had to push the coaches into classrooms for substituting, for covering long-term illnesses, etc. So while our plan was to move to this model in 21-22, we actually didn't fully implement the work of coaches working with all teachers, so coaching for all teachers, and coaches working with small groups of kids, and at times individual kids in classrooms, so more of a push-in model. You were familiar with pull-out, push-in. We weren't able to really start that until the 22-23 school year. And that was a year where we had to figure out the model more specifically, if I'm going to be honest. Like, we had a plan, we tried it out, and we had to make some changes. Just like anything new, that's normal, right? You're going to implement a model, and we learned a lot of lessons. And so since 22-23, that was year one of coaching, and now this is year two of 23-24 of this model coaching, not coaches, but just this model. So we're barely at the end of the second year. So you can, the return on this is kind of early to assess. And what we do know, though, that in a different model, our kids were failing also. So the conversation that parents brought forward, and been having this conversation with parents and educators throughout the year, is how do we best support all of our students? And we went to this model because we determined through data, those test scores you were asking about? We had data and an external review, actually, that was commissioned by my predecessor to demonstrate that the old model wasn't working. So we made an instructional decision to change the model that was broken. So when you're asking, I think you're really asking about the responsible use of resources, right? To put words in your mouth. We were responding to student data of students flatlining on a CMT, let's say, or demonstrating in a classroom that they weren't making progress through the assessments we were giving internally. So there's data behind that decision, and we felt coming out of a pandemic and having that data prior to a pandemic, that if we just continued to use the old model, we would continue to get the same results, which were not good. So a coach's day, I think one of the speakers the other night, I like how they phrase it, and they were very specific about a reading coach, a math coach. Like, that puts teeth, I think, in that type of title to the work. And what we are finding is that, remember the triangle I showed you, Alder Vitale, the instructional core? That should be familiar to you as an educator. We felt like we had to influence that core and not just pull kids out of the classroom and walk them down the hallway and give them instruction that was separate from the classroom that we had to push in the support. So the FTEs have always been there. Like, we didn't add to the budget. I just want to be clear about that. We reallocated already in existence resources. We didn't increase the budget to do that. We looked at what we had, we did not come and ask for more money, and we did different. That's what you're asking us to do every year, by the way. We looked inside of our current budget, we saw that there was something not working, and we decided to do something different. And it looks different. It doesn't look like the hospital room from 1960.
Just to clarify, what we remember and what we did was the evolution of the resource room teacher, where kids were going out and going into the resource room, and then whether that resource room and that teacher had IEPs associated with that classroom, she would go into that classroom, not only see her kids, but help the rest of the room out in the instructional piece. So I'm not clear that instructional coach, is there added certification to that research coach?
No, you're talking about resource room, which is special education. That's
Right.
a completely separate thing.
It is completely separate, but when they went into the classroom, they worked with not only their individuals, but the entire classroom. So whether it was...
Not always, Mr. Vitale, not always.
I said it evolved. There was an evolution with the resource room teacher, that initially they were pulled out and they worked in the classroom.
That's a controversial educational discussion that you're entering into.
this is-
I don't know that this is the place for it, though.
This is the experience of the resource room. Now that we have an instructional coach, is there an added certification? It's not a special education
So
certification?
that's apples and oranges that you're talking about.
No, I'm
There
talking...
isn't a special education certification required for coaches.
I'm talking about the instructional coach. Is there added certification that individual goes in there? Because she's also coaching the teacher. Am I understanding that correctly?
There is no added certification.
Okay, there is none, but she's there not only to provide instruction to the student, but for the improvement of the classroom instruction also?
To improve the instructional core, which includes developing the skill set of teachers, yeah.
Okay, so does she
And it's
have...
a collaboration. It's a
It's a
thing done
collaboration.
together.
So I guess this is where a lot of us are confused on the board, or I don't know a lot on the board, but many of the board members are confused at the point where how does that teacher assess the ability of the classroom teacher to know whether she needs further help?
There is no assessment of the classroom teacher. It is not a supervisory role. It is a co-teaching model. These are teachers inside a teacher's bargaining unit. They are not managers. They are not supervisors. They are teachers. And for the record, additional coaches is not part of this budget.
Okay?
There is nothing about coaches in the proposed budget.
So how many coaches at this point?
At what level?
How many
Mr.
coaches?
We have 4 in each elementary school and 1 in each middle.
Okay, was that...
Point of
what
order,
is-
Mr. Chairman?
Is this where ARPA monies...
I'm sorry, I feel like Mr. Vitale's monopolized a bit of the conversation. I was wondering, just in the interest of everybody being able to speak, can we maybe parcel out some of the questions that you might have in this discussion?
Well,
So
I
everybody-
spoke only because nobody else was speaking. If you had something-
I'd like to hear where this is going, actually.
I have
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you.
We're allowed
I
these
think it's up to the
instructional
chairman.
coaches with ARPA money?
I didn't hear your
Were
question.
any of these coaches hired with ARPA money? Or
No.
was any position filled with ARPA money?
There were no instructional coaches.
Any teaching positions or instructional positions with the ARPA monies? That's all I'm asking.
We hired counselors.
Okay, so okay.
For the time we had ARPA, we had instructional support in reading, but that has gone away. You'll see that as a reduction. And we hired a supervisor for equity and engagement.
And those positions are still there, all of them?
The counselors and the supervisor for equity and engagement are, yes.
Yes, so that went from ARPA monies to a line item in the budget, right?
The counselors and the supervisor for equity and engagement, yes.
Thank you, thank you.
Alderman Healy.
Oh, it's actually Alderman Federico again. I just want to correct my previous statement before we move on to the next topic of questions. So it's not a new question. It's just clarifying my previous question. Mr. Chairman, through you, I want to thank Alderman Vitale for pointing out page A18 in Appendix F. I don't know how I missed that, but through you to the City Finance Director, I did the math. Can you confirm that that number for this year's proposed budget is $142,725,930? Did I get close?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think that is close, if not accurate. I believe you would be adding, and it's on page 9 of the city budget, there's an education line item of $31,110,408. That would be the total for total city contributions, I believe, for A18, 24, 25 proposed.
Okay. So with those figures, it's still roughly a 2% increase. So other than that, I stand by everything I said before, except that it's 2% versus 1.8. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Jenkins.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Cutaia, just a couple of questions. You referenced going back to that triangle slide. And I think that as we look at this slide, we have to ask ourselves what the intended outcome is of improving this instructional core. Isn't it student achievement?
Yes.
Okay, so why are we not talking, why did we not come prepared to talk about student achievement? Because that really is at the core of how much we spend in our budget, how much we apply to educating our children.
I'm not sure I understand that line of thinking, so maybe you can ask that question differently?
Okay, so if we go back to, you mentioned the DRG is not being used. The last time that I saw was an article or a study that was organized as of 2023.
By the School Finance Project?
Yes.
Yeah. So that is not commissioned or blessed by the State Department of Education. That is a private organization conducting that.
Okay, I'm okay with that. And I understand that we're not using it to rank, but we are using it to be able to make comparisons. And as you said, from 2015 through about 2019, scores were flat. And then COVID. And we've kind of remained flat.
Flat-ish, yeah.
Okay. We've actually decreased. We're not flat. We're a little lower. Okay. I'll acquiesce flat. But my concern is that the communities, the towns that are in that DRG are improving where ours are not. If we say flat, and I say it's a little decreased by what I looked at, I'm looking at some of those other districts and seeing a slight increase, if not in some areas, math, substantial increase. So again, I go back to student achievement, and that's where I think it's important that we look at what we are doing as an education system when we come to and say this is how much money we need to keep doing what we're doing. We don't want to remain flat. Why are we not improving?
I agree with you 100% that we need to look at what we're doing so that we can improve our student achievement results. And I have that conversation with our Board of Education at least twice a year formally, and then as woven into our instructional highlights, which Ms. Glennon mentioned, we do monthly. But I'm not sure how that weaves into a budget proposal, so I'm just like thinking this through out loud with you, if I may. So I come and I say, our scores are flat and they're decreasing a little and we need more resources, so we need a 4.7% increase. Like that, is that how that conversation should go? Or now our scores are improving, we're doing such a great job, I don't need any more money. I'm not sure how that dialogue goes together at a Board of Aldermen level. I think at a Board of Ed level, There should be a dialogue around strategy and implementation of programming and what's the 5-year plan and getting into the nitty-gritty of it. And you're right, Mr. Jenkins, our return of our work on how we implement those resources hopefully influence the instructional core. And if you notice that a third of that is the development and support of teachers. So we're in one hand saying we need to improve our achievement scores, but leave teachers alone and get rid of coaches. I don't understand that conversation. And I want to have the conversation with our Board of Ed about what is the plan for the next few years on turning that ship around. And if you listen, bring it up. Very easy to access, Board of Ed, milforded.org. Every instructional highlight tells you what we are doing. That's the work. Today, these are the resources that we're asking for to support the work. And do we have room for improvement, Mr. Jenkins? Absolutely. Absolutely. I will be the first to talk about it. We have areas that we need to get to that we just can't get to fast enough. And in the educational organization, it's just it's the nature, it's the culture of our system. Change is slow. Change is hard. And we heard the other night, why would teachers of 30 plus years need any training? We all need to grow and develop, particularly with the challenges that face kids today and what we know about classrooms today. So I don't think that you and I are disagreeing necessarily. I agree. We have room for growth. But right now, with a part of our community, not holistically, we're disagreeing on how to do it. Because progress equals change, and change is hard. And that's what my prediction is what's happening right now, that not everyone is embracing the change. And if I continue to lead the system like it was being led, status quo, no other changes, no more budget money, I still think we'd be flattish. We have to take a look at what we're doing and how we can best support the core, so that I want to come back here next year, a couple of years, say, and as an investment in those few beginning slides, we can celebrate the improvement of our achievement. So I hear what you're saying, and I am having that dialogue. I am supported and held accountable by our Board of Ed for those.
And I appreciate your response. I think that where my disconnect may be is that we're here at a budget meeting, but budgets need to be results driven. And you agreed with that, correct? That we want to see student achievement at the highest, right?
So I just want to make sure I'm not agreeing to something that I don't agree to.
We both agree.
I believe student results should drive what our next steps are in goals, programming, action steps, and hence ask ourselves what are the resources we need to support that.
Okay. So in looking at aspects of this budget, I have to say, are these components of the budget all adding to the improvement of those results? My question is, what are the outcome measures that we are using if this DRG model is no longer being utilized? What with our HQI system is the outcome measure that we're looking to get to? What with this is our quantitative analysis versus a qualitative analysis? Because I don't see the measurement in the qualitative analysis. I want to see the measurement in the quantitative analysis.
If I could just, I just want to add something before Dr. Cutaia answers that, because I'm hearing, results-driven. The SBA score, while, is not the be-all and end-all of the results at the end of the day. I mean, we have lots of different measures. Our students are, she identified some of the accomplishments that we see annually. It's not just about that one test score taken on that one day a year. While some people may put a lot of emphasis on that, what's as important to us is the growth of this, overall growth and the whole child and what are they doing. So there's a lot more to the measurement than just the SBA score.
Thank you. So the growth of the whole child, the holistic, as measured by what?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to address the question that I think you asked. And if I misunderstood it, please, okay? So I'm going to take an opportunity to clarify the HQI system. So let's just say that we are an automotive company. Our mission likely would be to make a highly effective and even better car, right? Like that you would continue to work on making a better car, right? That would be the focus. And that's like the work of the system. I think HQI is being vilified in a way, but basically what it is, it's what every other school system in the nation is working on, and that is just getting better at teaching. Getting better at getting better. Like we are just focusing on good teaching. And there are tenets of high quality instruction that I don't think anyone on this board would argue. And if you have the model, I think I've seen copies of it in front of you. Actually, that's version 1, there's a second version. I don't know that anyone would argue with what's in that. Like, we want our children to set goals, self-assess and self-reflect, and establish their own journey in learning as guided by an adult. We want kids to be provided with opportunities for formative assessment, so we could provide on-the-spot feedback. We want kids to understand what learning goals are. We call them learning intentions now. And we want kids to understand what their success criteria is. So in order for me to be successful, I need to do X, Y, and Z. That's in the model. And in my world of superintendenting and education, that's just a definition of good teaching. So we started off on that journey back in 2018, and we created a drafty kind of model, and we handed it to coaches and department heads and curriculum leaders and classroom teachers and administrators, and we said, tell us what you think. Put your fingerprints on it. Because we want to establish a common definition of what does good teaching look like. That's simply all it is what does good teaching look like in 485 classrooms? And we had version 1, we call it the pencil drawing, that's probably what's in front of some of you, and then we got feedback and we created version 2. But that does not take the place of teaching reading. We teach phonics, phonemic awareness, vocabulary, fluency, and writing, comprehension and writing. We are currently, right now, revising that because of the mandate from the state. So our measures, I'm going to get to that part of the question, we have internal measures that we are revamping right now because of the change of instructional mandate, okay? So we're measuring students' ability to understand, to know letters and understand sounds. We're measuring the ability of students to decode words. And some of these measures are in place already and some are in development. We have for a very long time been measuring students' reading level. If you've been to a parent conference, your teacher's probably sharing what level your kid is on. I mean, it's probably some letter you don't even understand, right? So we're measuring internally as we go along in a quantitative way. And we measure by child, we measure by class, we measure by grade, and we measure by school. And with the onboarding of our new assistant superintendent, his priorities going into next year is to develop a data analysis protocol that will be used at every grade level, that we're going to train every teacher on, particularly in the areas of reading and mathematics at the elementary level, because we know we have room to grow there. And we have a newly rolled out mathematics curriculum, which I hear the rumor is we don't expect kids to know their number facts. That's false. And we do allow direct instruction, by the way, in our classrooms, but we also allow for kids to think, and that there's this notion of over-scaffolding thinking in the research. If you were to Google that, you could better understand. But we don't want to over-scaffold kids' thinking. We want to give them just enough support, not too much. And that's part of high-quality instruction. Knowing as a teacher when to stop giving the help and when to push in and give more help. So we have some internal quantitative measures that we have in place, and particularly probably the greatest level of growth is at the elementary level right now. So you're probably seeing many more changes at the elementary level now. That's probably part of the cause of this dialogue, right? But it's our effort to improve student achievement. And I can't say that it's being completely embraced by 100% of staff. But what I can say is that we're going to equally support 100% of staff. We're going to give that support. We're committed to that. And we're going to support kids. So our quantitative measures internally, so here's my theory of action, right? Change the curriculum, support teachers in continuing to develop and improve their instructional practice, that part of the triangle, support kids, measure along the way, and make modifications, what's happening in a classroom. And then I'm hoping that we could see an increase in SBA scores. That's not the only thing that impacts SBA scores. And I realize that there are many people, such as yourself, that have done the homework and you went and pulled all 23 districts' assessments. Like, there isn't a report that's sent to me and said, all right, here are all the DERG D results. But I can say that we are part of learning communities at the teacher administrator level, where we get to talk to and work with other school districts and learn with what they're doing and see if it impacts what we're doing and causes us to make any modifications. So I am confident that we have some internal measures and some internal initiatives and changes that will yield the results we're aiming for, because I have the same goal as I think you do, and to see those results increase, and that one measure, as Ms. Glennon is saying. We've also talked as a Board of Education, something that we've coined Milford measures, that we'd actually like to create a suite of data, qualitative and quantitative, that tells the full story, Alder Jenkins, because SBA doesn't tell the full story. But it is an easily consumable public data point that I know is real, that we need to work on. So I acknowledge that.
Thank you. Just a couple of follow-ups based on a couple of things that you said. To go back to your analogy of the production of the vehicle, it's fantastic to have internal measures that the developer can determine how proud they are of the systems in place to develop this vehicle and the vehicle that came about. But don't we have to have external measures to judge based on? Because if it's my vehicle, I'm going to be very proud of it because it's by my design. Don't we have to have those external measures? And I know that the SBA scores are not the only ones, but those are the ones that have been mentioned here tonight. Those are the things that we look at when we're compared to other communities. And to your point that you see those scores would go up, how long? What's our wait time? What's our goal for a wait time? What's our expectation?
So I would just clarify that the measures that we use internally are not just, homegrown and let's get a bunch of our educators and write the test that we want. They're actually standardized. And they're not just to prove that what we're doing right. Actually, multiple measures that we use are to identify where a student is demonstrating mastery of skill and where a student is deficient. So it serves both purposes, and they're highly standardized in most cases. Some come from state, some come from private vendors, et cetera. And yes, So it's a trickle, right? Improve curriculum, improve the experience of the student, continue to support the development of teachers. That's the trifecta, the core. And you measure that along the way, and the ultimate goal is to improve such measures as SBA. How long is different for every child and every teacher, because we're dealing with human beings. Unlike the car analogy, and ask any educator, the development of students has been impeded post-pandemic, right? We have currently going through the testing age, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. I might need help doing thinking right now. It's getting kind of late. I think our current 3rd graders started school in the pandemic as a kindergartner. Anybody help me out with that? Thank you. So in 3rd grade is when you take your first SBA. They started school online. And I'll tell you, Alder Jenkins, as a former principal, I always wanted my best teachers in the primary grades because there's so much foundational learning happening there. So much happens in kindergarten and 1st grade. Like, I've always worried that if kids are leaving 1st grade not reading, that I'm going to play a catch-up game by end of 1st grade, and I know that research is 3rd grade, but I wanted to be conservative on that. So currently, we have kids going through the SBA testing cycle that started their educational careers on a computer and not part of a community culture or classroom. And we're trying to quote unquote catch up on that as quickly as possible, like every other school district. So I can't speak to how others have caught up, but I just have the kids in front of us that we have today, right? So
That's my concern, is because if we've remained flat, yet there are other communities of similar characteristics that are increasing, what are we missing? And for children who are slower, who are not catching up, I saw a reference while I was doing some research, the pit.
the learning pit, yeah.
Okay. I don't see that those students being taught by other students are
There's no
necessary.
expectation to do that. I think students are asked to work together, but the role of the teacher has not been diminished. No one is saying that the teacher can't teach. I think that's where you're going.
I'm not
Okay,
I'm not
all
saying
right.
the teacher can't
Okay.
teach. I'm saying now, where do our interventionists come in? Who we don't have because we have coaches teaching teachers, not teaching kids.
Well, we can argue about that, but they
We can,
yeah.
because my constituents have called me with concerns. So it is definitely a discussion that should be had, especially when we're looking to approve a budget.
So, Mr. Jenkins, I'm going to give you and this community more information I've shared with the board a couple of times that informed our decision actually in 21 on shifting models. A study was commissioned of our reading practices by my predecessor prior to my coming. Third party, like you're saying, where's the third party analysis and quantitative data on how we're doing? So Dr. Fieser did that, called in a consulting group that specializes in certain areas. And that group found that we at the time had on staff 24 interventionists. And we had about 3,000 elementary students in our schools at the time. And out of the 3,000 elementary students, 1,100 were in intervention. 1/3 of elementary kids were in intervention. Now, from the education field, ask anyone who's gone to education school to be a teacher or principal or superintendent. 30% of kids not getting it or behind there's something different that is wrong. It's not the kid. Let me give you another piece of data that came out of that report. Of the 1,100 kids in intervention, so intervention, we assume the focus of that is intense instruction to catch up, right? That's kind of the definition of intervention. Out of the 1,100 kids in intervention during the time of this study, only 30% of kids exited intervention. So what is that, 300-ish kids? The other about 800 kids remained behind despite intervention services. So when we talk about instructional core, there's some data around that actually from the field. The data, the research demonstrates that based on regular instruction in a classroom, like everyday teaching, about 85% of your kids, if that instruction is effective and the conditions are perfect in that room, kids not coming home what I want to quantify is the mental health needs of our kids. So this, in addition to that. So with all conditions being perfect, about 85% of kids should have their learning needs met in a regular classroom with no additional support. 85% of kids in fourth grade, going to their fourth grade room every day, no pull out, no push in, 85% of kids are doing well. And the other 15 need intervention. Milford's rate of intervention was twice what the research supports it should be. Bring back interventionists is the cry that you're hearing, and not from all, but from enough. But our hesitation is, we had an intervention model, we had 24 interventionists on staff, and a third of our kids were in intervention, and only a third got out. And if you Google that research, there's a picture of children walking along a graduation stage, if you find it, and what intervention looks like in second grade, and the distance between a kid in second grade and a kid in intervention is about that big. And then they fast forward to a kid like that's in an 8th grade, and the gap is now this big. And then when they get closer to 11th grade, the gap has grown, which is counter to improving test scores. So I hear them, I hear you. But we had an intervention model that was broken. You can't ask a superintendent to continue to implement a model that was broken. Now, is the coaching model perfect? No. We will need to be responsive to what we're hearing. It's not falling on deaf ears. We're taking the feedback. I'm hearing you. Our teaching and learning department's going back, and we're going to modify it to see if there is a happier place that people can consume better and is more visible in supporting kids and teachers. That's what I can promise you, okay?
I appreciate that. I will end with this to anyone else's questions. Again, my question is, how long do we wait for quantitative analysis for this model? I would love to have a copy of that study that you were talking about.
With the growth.
Yeah. And lastly, I'm wondering what our current scores say about those third graders who aren't reading on level. And if it was a third that were not there before and our scores are where they are now, flat, what do they say about where they are now in this model? Thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Healy.
Thank you. Minus the microphone over here, so we'll stretch it out a little bit. From the chair to Dr. Cutaia, I'm starting with your letter that's in your budget book dated January 11th of 2024. And I notice on item number 6, which is page 2 of the letter, it makes a comment relative to, while at the time in our budget history, we were able to use the end-of-year transfers, redirect funding for school buildings and grounds, we're no longer able to experience that and such due to the zero-based budgeting process. So where was that initiated? When was that change?
Alder Healy, when was the change in
Yes.
moving upon my arrival? We made that very quick shift, probably starting with the 1920 budget. Would you, Mr. Brennan? I would reserve the right to be wrong about that date, so if I could get back to you. But my best answer to you is 1920.
Okay. I'm noticing at item number 2, your specialized programming. And some of the questioning tonight, dealt with return on investment. And I was struck in the comments on Monday evening in the public session. And a number of the parents that came forward expressed, their gratitude relative to the special programs. They talked about their specific situations and their children, and we have an increase here of $522,000. Is there someone on your team that could explain how these programs are going to be enhanced further?
Yes, I'm going to turn that over to our Director of Pupil Personnel Services, Ms. Jennifer Stewart.
Thank you.
Good evening. So the behavioral support program would support students at the elementary level who require additional intensive support to accommodate their behavioral and social needs that can't always go into the regular education classroom, so they need that smaller setting to support them academically as well as their behaviors. And then as far as the specialized support program, it also would support our students, say with autism, some learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, to really give them that smaller setting. And the programs allow our students to stay in district instead of always saying they might need an all special ed school that is out of district.
Thank you. And on your last page, when we talk about savings that were realized, and this is not an insignificant amount, $460,578 across various accounts, from the curriculum work, Medicare, defined contribution, security services, contracted maintenance, non-public transportation, property, liability insurance, educational supplies, computers. I'm assuming this is, and you could clarify it for me, a comprehensive team approach from your senior management to effectively look for cost savings initiatives on an ongoing basis, continuously?
Yeah, I would characterize our budget process as grueling. I ask any administrator, they probably answer the same. I put my eyes on every line item. I click on every attachment. I want to see what we're purchasing, when we're purchasing, why we're purchasing. It's aligned to, a curriculum cycle, particularly in teaching and learning side. So we are combing through all the requests, saying no to a lot of things, not yet to a lot of things, and in some cases there's an ebb and flow in our work. So there may be some years where we need more in the contracted services because of need and demand, and some years less. So you'll see some of that nuance occurring in these areas as well.
But if I'm looking at your proposal, and I'm looking at what the Board of Finance took away from your original proposed budget, and I look at this significant savings, I see no reason that you're going to change your business processes. You're going to continue along the same road that you've just described, and continuing savings could reach this level or perhaps even higher.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I just wanted to make that point relative to what was not approved or what was taken. And another comment I wanted to make was that the budget document in and of itself that was produced by the Board of Education and your senior management team, I think is an excellent document. It has a lot of granularity. There's a lot of detail to it. I certainly appreciate that. I think everyone on the board also, based on the questions, it gives us a quicker sense in terms of discerning and looking at the numbers. On your slides, Board of Education Proposal 24-25 budget categories, we're talking about facilities, and there's an increase of $927,000+, equates to a 19.97% increase from the previous year. Would somebody on your team could explain what is going to happen relative to facilities that necessitates that increase over last year?
Yes, sir. Let's just find that page for you if you give us a moment.
Right here. It's where the pie chart is.
Right, but there's a page in the budget book that delineates the project, so we'll just give us a second, okay?
Okay, thank you. The other larger one also is on that same, the educational supplies and equipment, which is $292,000+.
Okay, so
we could cover those too.
on A21, you will see a breakdown of the building projects and grounds. That amounts to $723,500 and $558,150. A21.
Yep.
See that breakdown?
Okay.
It tells you the school, the description of the project, and the cost, line by line.
So is there any other detail that could be provided? What is the priority list, here, as you see it, in terms of programmatic enhances? If these had numerical numbers next to them, what would be the top three?
Oh, that's hard. I'm going to pass that over to Mr. Brennan.
Thank you.
Through you, Alderman. So this list here is, so there's a couple ways that we look at prioritization of projects for buildings and grounds. So we have a running list with Mr. Bradbury and his team and the rest of us work through of a list of priorities based on buildings and then district-wide. And what they do is they take a look at each one in isolation at that building level. So what are the buildings projects that are prioritized in that building? And what are the grounds projects prioritized in that actual list as well? And then what they also do is take a look at how do those two combine together to classify projects on a list of priorities based off of the most pressing need. And the real metric that we use to help guide us with that is things that are of life safety. So anything that's like a danger or something that needs immediate attention that we need to fix because it could cause a serious problem, that's where that takes priority. So when you look at this list, we are intentionally trying to put more money, as Dr. Cutaia had mentioned with that end of the year money question that you had at the beginning, where we haven't seen end of the year money in the last few years that we've been able to put at maintaining our facilities. Our facilities are in great shape. We really do try to take care of them as best we can, but they are aging and they do have needs. And those needs need to be addressed. So some of the money that we had found in savings at the end of the year was able to be prioritized to buildings and ground projects that Mr. Bradbury was something that he could almost, I don't want to use the word count on, but he could use that money at the end of the year and put that towards projects he has. That has not been something based upon the zero-based budgeting that we've been really tight on looking at that line, each line item and making sure that it's very specific to what we need. We have not been seeing those savings, that amount at the end of the year that we can now prioritize and put towards end of the year projects. Because our buildings are aging, they need money. So this is something that we were intentionally making a move towards with this year of rather than waiting till the end and hoping for some money to put towards things, intentionally calling those out at the beginning of the budget process so that we can allocate money to that. In terms of those specific needs, those needs change over time. We have a list here of the different projects you have in that A21. This just represents, which I think is an important piece too, this isn't a cumulative list of all the projects that need to be completed right now. Mr. Bradbury has a list that's many, many, many pages long, and I think we actually even looked at it. during the budget process, the Board of Ed actually asked us to go through that list as well in that part of the process. That list has many millions of dollars. I think 8.9 million was one of the numbers that comes to the top of my head of projects. And that list isn't even exhaustive. I think that's an important piece too. That list that Mr. Bradbury has as his top priorities isn't even an exhaustive list of everything that needs to be done. But what he does is he prioritizes those, and it scales down, and you take a look at by building and also comparing building to building, right? Like, what are those lists? So when you take a look at these projects on A21, this represents the list of projects that Mr. Bradbury and his team have prioritized as a list of things that would be on the front burner given that money for next year. Does that answer the question?
Yes, appreciate it. And the zero-based budgeting, is that working for you?
I think it does work, and I think what we need to be mindful of is that we have to intentionally put things in there that we'd need for, right? So with these building projects, we can't assume that there's going to be money at the end of the year that we can allocate towards other areas that we're kind of holding off on the side or the back burner. Zero-based budgeting is your best approach to budgeting. That is the way that budgets should be built. And every single line item throughout the budget needs to be justified. So when you think about budgeting, you don't just take it for granted. You don't say, well, we spent $2,000 in this line item last year, so let's say we're going to spend $2,000 in the line item this year, or give it some kind of cost of living increase type scenario where you say, all right, well, we spent $2,000 last year there, let's spend $2,200 there this year. Zero-based budgeting eliminates that. Every single item that we ask for in this budget that gets rolled up through level to level, so that it starts, teachers have their requests, they bring them to the principals then take a look at those budgets, they bring it to instructional supervisors and they collaborate on that, and then it comes to central office staff. So there's different layers of approval, and zero-based budgeting really takes a close eye at each one of those and makes sure that we are budgeting for what we need in the budget.
Thank you. I'm going to encourage Dr. Cutaia along with her management team, and I will be giving the same message to every department head that comes, that the significant savings that are achieved by prudent and efficient management, related skills make an impact, and they should be recognized. And I'm recognizing them here, but we're going to look and say the same message and look for initiatives internally so that we can do cost savings wherever we can, achieve them. And on your slide relative to the triangle that's been mentioned here this evening with student engagement and teacher knowledge and skill and the content relative to rigor and relevance, I wrote my own notes out. And I'm a senior citizen, and I wrote, it's life plan. And the life plan is, you never stop learning. You listen more, you absorb, you discern, and then you have the intelligence to ask another question. So I'm pleased with the budget as it's been presented, the level of detail, and we will be going through it. I've learned quite a bit in my short time on the Board of Aldermen. I've availed myself to contact city officials and directors independently to improve my own knowledge in terms of operational procedures and understand, the processes, and look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Alderman Bevan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you. I only have two questions, and one was brought up this evening. Can someone tell me what a teacher in residence actually is?
Yes. This is a person who is, I would say, similar to a student teacher. And it is an individual that is vetted out through a educational organization in the state. CREC is the company we're working with. And those individuals, we work with CREC to interview and identify individuals who would come to us as sort of a student teacher. So they're taking courses outside of a school day, but they are working side by side with a mentor teacher and learning how to become a teacher. And our commitment is that we would hire them onto our staff the following year. So they're with us for the year, taking courses, learning how to be a teacher, student teaching side by side with one of our experienced teachers, and we commit to hiring that individual. And in most cases, those individuals are teachers of color. In our own analysis, we find a great gap between the representation of students of color and the individual representation of teachers of color. There's just not enough teachers of color on in our workforce. So this is our way to attempt to diversify. So we're likely hiring teachers anyway, based on turnover, et cetera, retirements. So this is one way for us to onboard and commit to individuals who want to be teachers in Milford. Would that be a good way to describe it? To increase and strengthen the pipeline. Thank you, Ms. Capazno.
My second question is, and I couldn't find it in the budget. It's in the Appendix A, page A13. On the very bottom, it tells us the salaries of certain union people and what they got as far as a raise through their contract. But on the very bottom, it mentions the superintendent and the 2 assistant superintendents to where their wages are to be determined. Now, I know that it will be determined after the budget, or soon after. But is that number in the budget right now from the previous year? The previous year said it was about $593,000. Is that reflected in this year's budget at all?
This year, you mean 23-24?
Next year. This year, what we're talking, the budget right now, is your salary and the other 2 assistant superintendents, are their salaries in the budget as we see now?
They're budgeted for.
At 111 million?
It is in the budget, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. I thought that was a trick question, but yes, no, it's in there.
Alderman Archeolo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you to the superintendent. You actually answered a good number of my questions in your very thorough report. I did want to, I understand that the need for behavioral support is not unique to Milford. It's a nationwide issue post-COVID. I know that behavioral needs have become much more brought into the public eye, I think. And it looks like your budget makes some great steps to address those growing needs. I did have a quick question about the grant you guys got through Bridges, in partnership with Bridges for for therapists. Is there any chance not for this year, but for future years, are you guys pursuing grant opportunities to maybe mitigate those 3 as well?
So if I'm correct, Bridges is the agency who applied for and attained the grant. So we're happy.
Should ask Bridges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly, we would always entertain partnering on grants, and Milford isn't always a demographic that qualifies for grants in so many ways. So if the opportunity avails itself, we absolutely will jump on that. So the cost per clinician is about $50,000 each, and they remain employees of Bridges. So they would report to them and they would just deploy them to our schools. And I was asked this by, I think the Board of Ed, the access to the clinicians became immediate. It's almost like people were waiting for this, and our kids, our families in the 2 schools particularly new this year, Law and West Shore, those clinicians are busy. So the access became immediate. So based on what we're seeing manifesting in the 2 middle and foreign, that we believe the need is great. So a priority for us.
Absolutely. I do have a follow-up question, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to, based on the way that you folks are talking, it seems like the educational needs of the Milford students is sort of like a living organism. It's changing, it's evolving, and it seems like you're doing rolling changes to address those as needed, rather than sort of a static metric such as standardized test scores.
We are a living, breathing organism, or organization, or I don't know what I'm saying. Yes. It's getting a little late, right? Did I get any credit for that? We are continuing to work on being flexible, responsive organization, and as we learn more about our students and staff needs, we want to build, and it's that second lens I was talking about. While the triangle got some, stuck with some people, that second lens, systemically, we have to be responsive. We have to be able to deploy support and resources in possibly different ways, even within the base budget that is not represented in 4.7. So we look within the current resources and how can we do things differently or better. But then there are times when we want to add additional supports, like the clinical therapists, as we're talking about. So yeah.
That's it. Thank you very much.
Alderman Marlowe. Oh. Alderman Casey.
I just saw, you talked about the common curriculum, and you don't want to teachers be not self-selective in their teaching, I guess. And have you gotten any pushback from the teachers that, teaching, I imagine like some teachers have been there for, 20 or 30 years, and now you're talking, saying, we want a common curriculum. Do you have any pushback about that, regarding that?
A common curriculum is core to coherence and ensures that a second grade experience at Live Oaks is common with a second grade experience at JFK. I'll just use that as an example. And I think every teacher wants good things for kids. So I'm struggling answering your question because I feel like it's kind of a no-win answer. I in any way never want to depict a teacher, not being willing to. I feel like that is inherent in your question a bit. So I don't know that I feel 100% comfortable answering your question, if you can tell.
Yeah, but that's the whole point though. We're educating, you're charged with educating the people in Milford, the students in Milford. So that's an important point. If we are doing something that, that works and you're telling them not to do it, that can be problematic. So I preach it because one time, on Monday, we were talking that plenty of parents and plenty of teachers are concerned about the quality of teachers, the quality of the students taking care of us later in life. So that's an important concept. So that's important to me, and I think important to the parents too.
If I could answer this. I'm going to go back to 2016, 2017. This is toward the end of Dr. Fieser's tenure, where we've referenced, she did some studies which identified some needs that she started to work on with staff, which included having instructional coherence throughout the district. So this is where, as Dr. Fieser just said, you have the same thing happening at second grade at one school, second grade at another school. They're all following the same curriculum. And this was a need that was identified by Dr. Fieser. She started the work with staff to develop a model of coherence in the district and then announced her retirement. And she shared with the board at the time that staff was concerned that all the work that they had done to begin this model would be discarded. And they felt it was very important. And when we did our focus groups and our surveys to identify what we should be looking for in our next superintendent, this surfaced as a continuing theme, that people wanted to see coherence in the district. They want consistency. So this was something that the board took to heart, and it became a focus of our moving forward with making a selection for a new superintendent, that somebody who would continue this work. So the work is rooted back in Dr. Fieser's days, and it had, it definitely had support from staff, it had support from the community, it had support from the people that participated in our focus groups, that this is what they wanted to see continue. Now I can tell you that when I see people ask, should I stay away from any neighborhoods in town or any schools better than the other? Almost unanimously, the answers that I see are, you can't go wrong anywhere in our city. You can't go wrong at any school. All of our schools are great, and they pretty much all follow the same thing. So this is a concept that, this is what I believe people want to see in Milford. They want to see consistency throughout the school district so that you can go in any school and you can get a consistent education. So I think that there's importance to that work, and it's something that, this is a Board of Education directive. So when we hired Dr. Cutaia, this is what we directed her to continue, and that is what she's doing. So I want to be clear on that. This is not her baby. This is something that we started.
Thank you. And the follow-up, we're talking to Alderman Jenkins. Dr. Cutaia, you mentioned some choice words like, and the former motto was failing and broken, and you use such words as which are not good. And so this sounds like Milford education is in crisis, or it was coming out of crisis. And so, when did it happen, and what led to the failing models and the broken system? Who's responsible for the broken system? And can you expand on that?
I am very sorry that there is a conclusion that Milford is a broken system.
You said that, though. I'm sorry.
No, I said that the intervention model was broken. I did not say we have a broken system. I want that to be very clear in public. I was speaking about a specific model, and I'm afraid that there is a population that's trying to depict our system as broken and failing. Hence, me starting with the successes that aren't talked about enough. And a system success is not equal to a measure, albeit we've already discussed the need to improve that. That strategy was broken. We have a thriving school system. We don't have problem hiring teachers. Our HR department doesn't have a hard time recruiting. People want to come work for Milford Public Schools. We have a good reputation on the workforce side. We attract families because they hear about the good school system of Milford. So I please will rectify that we are not a broken and in crisis system.
Was the prior method failing, though?
Prior method for what?
You use a word like the system that you entertained with Alderman Jenkins was the prior method, the interventions, I guess, was failing, and now the new method is working, I guess?
So let me explain intervention for a minute. So intervention, if you have a child, Mr. Casey, in 3rd grade, and is reading below grade level. In the old model, the reading teacher, interventionist would come, pick up your child, walk them down the hallway, do some skill work in an element of reading that may or may have not been aligned with what's happening in the classroom that's in question, and then the student will be returned, and that student was missing 20 to 30 minutes of some type of core instruction is what we call it. And that model of pulling kids out, giving them an extra dose of reading, at the time of the study was not working for 800 kids. That those kids were not exiting intervention. They weren't catching up in their reading level. They remained behind in reading level. That intervention model wasn't working. That's the only thing I said that is not working.
Thank you.
Alderman Beatty.
Through you, Chairman Vitro, thank you, Dr. Cutaia, and the rest of the panel. I too would like to comment on the quality of the report, the information we get. Many of us on both sides of the aisle have been to presentations, studied it, followed it. We have quite a few people who have served on the Board of Education, and we are committed to lifelong learning and learning how to do that. I wanted to comment that when you said you align the goals, this was very important, align the budget to the goals of, you mentioned and you walked us through, and you happened to mention Chrome, and that was maybe deliberately on your part an intended reference, but I was new to the board at that time, 2017, when we looked at that sometimes in isolation. How much will it cost? What will it do? It's an item in the budget. And really, if we hadn't looked at it, if you hadn't taught us to, all of us, to look at it in relation to the goals, you would not have been able to be as nimble in 220 when this system really did rise to the occasion with the kids who were stuck at home with online learning. And so they are connected each time, and it is an expenditure, but it adds to the sustainability down the line. So I thank you for pointing it out. I do have a question and a suggestion, and this I have brought up before. It's not just my personal opinion, but a background in research. I understand that you went through all the measurements, and none of us at this point of time would think we measure a child by CMT, SBA, the SATs, the standardized testing. But Dr. Fieser's testing in 2008, which I wasn't around then on this board, enabled you to focus in on an area. We don't want to just use quantitative measurement, but how about doing a qualitative study? I mean, hiring somebody, a qualitative study of the coaches, and really satisfy people. It doesn't have to be standardized testing. How many kids, how many of the coaches, and how many sessions, but a qualitative study. And I don't mean just anecdotal. The parents of students who are in with coaches, as we heard in testimony last night, make compelling arguments for. But I mean a scientific database, qualitative study. Some things are not measurable by standardized testing. And then that would help us to discern where to align the budget to the goals going forward, and we would be educated with data. It's an expenditure.
Thank you. We'll take that into consideration.
Alderman Marlowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, hi, Dr. Cutaia.
Hello,
First, a couple comments and then a question or so. Comments are, again, I appreciate the organization of the budget, the questions in the back, so I'm not asking questions that are already answered. I get that. A lot of my questions have already been answered, so I'm not going to re-ask those. When I approach the budget, what I do, though, is, and everybody approaches one differently, and I go through the numbers first, And then I go back and I first read Ms. Glennon's comments and then yours. And I did go online, and because I wasn't sure exactly of the educational philosophy, and I don't want to get into that discussion, but what I have to do is to understand what you're trying to do. So that's how I approach the budget this year, is looking at, what the developmental relations framework was, what HQI is. We had this little picture that I printed out, and I was told by Ms. Glennon that it was a framework or a blueprint for HQI, and I read blueprints all day, but I've had a tough time with this one. So I guess my comments when I look at the budget, this budget in particular, I was trying to see if the goals and the educational philosophy, I guess, because that's what your budget is reflecting, correct? You have a goal and you're trying to meet that goal, so this is what comes of that. So for future, with that educational philosophy, what's the next step that you see? What, from a staff standpoint, first of all, and then along with that, when we were here last year and we talked about doing a study, and I'm not going to get into the numbers on that, but part of the utilization, the study, and I was drawn to the evolution of the classroom space and the thing of where have all the classrooms gone. And with the educational philosophy that's in place right now, what do you see when I look at the evolution of the classroom space, how they've changed? Where do we see that headed, and are our facilities able to handle what is the next thing, so to speak?
Thank you for your questions. Just trying to get signals here, it's fine. So we are trying to remain as consistent as possible so that we're not changing things up for staff all the time. So we are remaining consistent and committed to making the vision of the learner come alive in every classroom, and that how it applies to 5-year-olds through 18-year-olds. We focus on that. We focus on continual support through social emotional learning based on the DRF, the framework. We have a newly onboarded equity framework, so that part is new. We'll likely be doing more work on that next year we're bouncing around a theme for next year that is really related to belonging, making sure every student has a place of belonging. And every staff member too. We're finding that our adult learners also have needs, so just that there's a place of belonging for all of our student and adult learners. In the area of HQI, we are likely focusing on something that we are calling flow. So that means what are the learning expectations for kids that strike the exact balance so that kids aren't frustrated because something is over their head, but they're also not bored. So what's the sweet spot? And what are the teaching skills around that? So every kid in a classroom, average class size is about 18. So every student, 18, all those students in a class are appropriately challenged. So that really is likely the goal of next year under instructional practice for the whole system. That answer becomes very diverse when you take a look at pre-K and kindergarten. We are continuing to deepen our knowledge about intentional play and executive functioning. And that's some really good work we're doing in our schools, by the way. I mean, that represents a strong school system. We have a clear focus and intention around intentional play and executive function. In elementary classrooms, it's likely going to be the science of reading, particularly K through 3. We are mandated to focus on that. It is good work. We're bringing in new materials. I think we'll see an immediate impact, particularly in areas of phonics and phonemic awareness. Our teachers are learning a lot about those strategies. So we'll see some significant changes in the area of reading at the elementary level. We'll continue our next level of work in mathematics. We have some areas in math at the elementary level to focus on particularly like assessments that inform teachers on how students are doing so we can be responsive to student needs. At the middle school, we just rolled out a new math curriculum and new math resource that was supported by the budget. So math teachers at the middle school are going to dig in deeper into using that new program. Golly, I wish I had some of our administrators here to speak because there's so much happening as far as next level of work. This summer, we're hosting a literacy forum and inviting other districts to come talk about with experts the best practices in literacy and particularly what's happening at the secondary level. So we revamped our language arts curriculum in middle school and in high school. And actually with the support of the budget, we're infusing a lot of new titles and refreshing titles in our classrooms for, just bring books in that kids are much more interested in and representing all walks of life. In science, we continue to implement, I think we're like in year 2 or 3 of a new curriculum. A couple years ago, we invested in new equipment and new units of study there. I'm missing so much because there is so much. So that's just a short list of lots of things that are happening next year. You see in the list of curriculum, a lot of the social studies curriculum has been rewritten. That's why we're asking for some materials and resources there. I don't know where that list might be, but I would call your attention to that list of new curriculum that's being implemented. So it's just a natural, as Mr. Archiolo was asking, it's just a natural evolution of improvement. It's not because something is broken, it's you don't want to get into, like you take care of your car, regular maintenance, right? You go get the oil change, you try to prevent things from, so that is like the regular maintenance on the teaching and learning side. So those are some of the highlights that we're hoping to work on next year.
Thank you.
It is not a complete list, but.
Sure. But to follow up, do you have, from a space utilization standpoint, do you have the space or do you see classrooms being adjusted, shifted to accommodate what you're looking to do?
So we are regularly revisiting the use of space and in some more specified areas. The tech ed plan was before this board. You graciously gave us the additional monies to revision those spaces. We are going to venture into the culinary art spaces. We're going to have to revision those. They look like the 1960s operating room. They're not appropriate culinary spaces for today's industry. We'll need to do that at both foreign and law, and that'll be a particular challenge at foreign, actually. I've dreamed out loud that I'd love to bring back, and I'm not allowed to say this phrase, but I'm going to say it. I think I see someone looking at me, a crooked back here. I want to bring back home ec to middle school, but a 2024 version of home ec. I'm finding that we have students that are, even my son, like, how do you change a light bulb? We don't do things like that with kids anymore. Or, how do you boil water? Like, I know that's simple, stupid examples, but I think there are some basic life skills that are important for us to focus on, starting in 6th grade. That's going to require a revisit of space. And then in the regular classrooms, you see that there is a request for some furniture, and it's mobile furniture. It's not the desk and chair connected together. So mobile furniture allows us to use space differently and allows us to group children differently. And while we will never, as I mentioned, never diminish the role of the teacher, the role of the student has significantly changed though. Like in the black and white picture where everyone was sitting in rows. And by the way, in the business picture, you saw that too, not just the classroom. we vision our classrooms where kids are working together. And not to strip individual accountability, but we would like to get rid of the desk and chair connection. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? The one that is on one piece. That's all over our high schools and many of our middle schools. So we'd like to better utilize space by bringing in, and they're much more space efficient too. And they're in a different shape. They're like octagonal. You can create groups differently. They even have writing surfaces that are erasable, so you could show your thinking out on your desk, and it's wipeable. So there's some advancements in furniture that we'd like to invest in that allows us to use our space differently, to get to your question. So we'll know a little bit more about that in about a year, though.
Thank you. And separate comment, I guess, at some point, I know everyone's busy. I would like to sit down with you because I'm not sure I totally understand the philosophy, and I'm not sure I agree with every point of it. So at some point...
Happy to sit with you at any time.
Thank you.
Alderman Fowler.
Thank you. Hopefully this is a quick question, but, back-to-back years, the Board of Finance has reduced the budget, 1.8 million and 1.3 million. Just for insight, did they give you any rationale as to why they made those reductions in back-to-back years?
They didn't speak to back-to-back. They just spoke about their reasoning on reducing this year. I don't recall. Mr. Fowler, I think you can access that video on YouTube to get a more accurate answer. Then you really shouldn't rely on my memory right this moment.
That's why I was hoping for a simple yes.
Yeah, you just waited too long to ask that question. 7:30 would have yielded a better answer. I'm sorry.
Alderman Jenkins.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I will be brief, I promise. Just a little tidying up that I want to do here, and I want to thank you, first of all, for the organizational chart that you sent over. There's a few gaps and areas that I want to fill in, though. Underneath Mr. Altieri, there are the instructional supervisors, 9 of them, I believe. Are there teacher leaders under that are not listed on this organizational chart?
There are teacher leaders. We only included those individuals that would be considered managers and supervisors, because that's what we consider as district leadership.
Okay.
So there are some teacher leaders that are part of the MEA bargaining unit, and they work throughout schools. So I misunderstood the directive.
That's okay.
Yep.
I'm just looking to fill in those gaps. So there are 6 of those, correct?
Hold on.
2 humanities, 1 STEM, 2 health PE guidance, 1 technology. Do I have those correct?
Just a minute.
Okay.
It's in this notebook. Here we go. So there is an instructional technology.
Yep.
There is a elementary humanities. There is a reading specialist type person. There is a student wellness and development. And there is a secondary STEM. There is a humanities that is vacant, that is in the process of being filled.
Got it. Okay. And then...
And there's a 0.5 person on the PPS side that handles all birth to 3.
Okay.
That's also a teacher leader. She handles all testing, onboarding of birth to 3 special needs children.
Thank you. And that would be underneath the instructional supervisors, correct?
No, sir. So the 0.5 is under PPS. So that would be under the Director of Pupil Personnel Services. And then the others that I mentioned would be in the Teaching and Learning Department.
Got it. Okay. And so then we have our 14 principals and instructional leader underneath principal. Is that the title? Basically vice principal?
So at the elementary?
Yeah, well, throughout. I think we have one at each elementary, one at each middle, and two maybe at the high school level, was it?
Not.
And I don't believe there's one at the academy.
So the elementary has a teacher leader. That person handles,
Teacher leader, okay.
that the title is teacher leader.
Okay,
That they are part of the teachers union. They are not supervisory in nature.
Okay.
They have no supervisory responsibilities. They help with student behaviors, scheduling. They provide supports through SRBI, which is an intervention process of getting students help that they need.
but they do not have classrooms, correct?
They don't have classrooms, no.
Okay.
And those positions have been in place, I don't know how long, 2008. At the middle school, there's an assistant principal, is that what you mean?
Yeah, I guess I'm equating those teacher leaders in the elementary to a vice principal at the middle or at the high school level?
The teachers union would be adamantly against that statement, I assure
Okay.
you. They are not assistant principals.
Okay,
They have different responsibilities.
got it.
So the middle school has one assistant principal and the high schools have two assistant principals.
And then lastly, 32 instructional coaches throughout the elementary and middle.
I don't feel that that would be appropriate to add to this organizational chart. No more than you would add art teachers or music teachers or fifth grade teachers. They are
Well-
teachers.
But they don't have a classroom.
School counselors don't have classrooms, school psychologists don't have classrooms, social
Understood.
workers don't have classrooms. Okay.
I'm just filling out my org board. I
Yep.
understand that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Alderman Vitale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. And I think this is a Mr. Brennan question. Give you, Dr. Cutaia.
I didn't hear you, I'm sorry.
I think this is a Mr. Brennan question, so I can give you a rest.
Thank God.
Speaking about our non-lapsing account, number one, how much money is in there? Have we put anything in it last year? And what projects would it be used for, that money be used for?
We do not have a non-lapsing account.
Then what is that account called, Peter, for that?
So you could carry over, so a non-lapsing account, you could carry over a certain percentage of your money from year to year.
So there is an account, a non-lapsing
There is an account, yeah, but.
76, is it Fund 76?
Yeah,
Fund 76.
that account would be held on the city side though, because as you know, we're not allowed to carry money over from year to
Well,
year.
I thought it was 2% of a percent of the budget that wasn't used that could go into that account?
In order for that to happen though, you would need to have you'd have to outline what you were planning to do with that money and then go through boards of approval to move that money over to the next year.
Oh, so it's not an account that accumulates, it's not lapsing, so
No.
that you could use it on projects?
No, so at the end of the year, we expend all of our money, a non-lapsing account, and Mr. Aridisi could please jump in at any point as well too, if you'd like. We would have to let you know a specific reason that we would want to put money into a non-lapsing account, and then we would have to get approval in order to carry that money over to the following year. So right now, it is my understanding that we don't have any money in the non-lapsing account.
I think there's 150 million in it.
150 million?
Through you, Mr. Chair,
150,000?
just to clarify.
I would like to know that. That'd be great. I would
It's
like to.
150,000, let me correct that.
Okay. If we, 100, okay.
You almost ended the meeting there, Alder Vitale. I think
Wish
the
list.
last time, Mr. Adrucci, that we did this was for COVID. I remember Mr. Vicitelli, it was the end of 1920. We couldn't expend everything because we, sent all kids home at the time. And so I think it was prudent for us to put it into that account for unforeseen COVID costs moving forward. Did I have that right?
Yes, that's correct. Recent uses of the remaining balance in that non-lapsing Fund 76 account have been used for COVID-related expenditures. And There is still some money left in the account. It's not zero, but it's not a large amount either.
That amount is at 150,000?
I don't remember the exact amount over my head, but it could be close to that, yes.
What projects can that be used for? Is it controlled by the Board of Ed, or is it controlled by the city side?
It's controlled, the Board of Ed would make a request to spend the money. It initially was approved, as Mr. Brennan said, by the Board of Finance to put into the account, but then it's managed through request from the Board of Ed to the city to spend, to make the expenditures.
So they can use it on a specific project if it was approved by the Board of Finance? Is that how you understand it?
Yes.
So is there a project that could be possibly, that money be used for, just think about it, just a rhetorical, that maybe that money can be used to supplement whatever, some needs of the Board of Education? Thank you. But there is 150,000, not 150 million. It's my mistake.
Alderman Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I liked the presentation of where we've been with the old photographs and where we're going to be, and maybe this budget is an embodiment somewhat of where we are. And for some of us, the decision-making process tries to embody all of that. And I noted with interest, Alderman Vitale early tonight talked about the fact that Milford is still losing population. Its demographics continue to decline. And back in December, you presented this board with a study that had demographic projections on the city of Milford. And at that point in time, you'd represented that we would be getting the data on that. And you and I have exchanged 2 or 3 different letters on that. And I know in your last correspondence, you said that you weren't going to provide me the data because you felt like my mind had been made up. And my mind hasn't been made up. I really do want that data. And you've told us the data exists. And I was frankly hoping that, although I was skeptical, that you would provide us with that data that would tell us in part where we're going demographically and the things that drives inside the budgets that are in part in front of us today. I was hoping you'd change my perspective. I will ask you again, can you provide us with that data, please?
So Alder Smith, I have your request in writing. I have notified the board of your request. I felt like our priority was the focus on the 24-25 budget. And so we'll be getting back to you with a response to your email.
Well, I appreciate it. That's a very different answer than I saw. And the other one, I'll look forward to that data. I would appreciate that. Thank you.
I said I would respond to your email. I did not say I would provide you with data, just to clarify publicly. So we will be responding to your email.
Are you going to
my clarification.
Are you going to be providing the data?
We need some time to take a look at your email again. Like I said, we are focusing on a 24-25 budget, but we will be responding to your email.
So I don't understand here. You said the data exists. You presented us with projections. I've simply asked for the data 3 different times in writing, and you're not ready to say that you'll provide that data? You're going to respond. You could respond with another, no, I'm not going to give you the data.
I've already answered the question, sir.
No, actually, you haven't. Are you going to provide the data?
I will respond to your email at a later date.
Chair, point of order.
So you're not going to provide the data. Look,
Chair Vitro, point of order, please.
What's the point of order?
Through Chair to Alder Smith. Please, let's keep our focus on the budget. That's what we're here for. We're all part of a team. We need to keep decorum. You are making myself uncomfortable, and I don't think I'm the only one. So I think it's time to dial it back. If you have a question about the budget, proceed. If not, that's the end.
All right, well, I do have a question on the budget. It has to do with the demographic projections that were provided to us. I'm not going to take an answer that says I can't ask questions. People have a right to ask questions. That's why we're on this board. If people don't want to exercise the responsibility that you're given on this board, that's fine.
we have
I
a
am going
recess?
to.
Excuse
And I'm
me,
going to ask
Chair,
for
the
that.
question
And if I
was
don't
asked
get,
and
if I don't
answered.
get the data that's been asked for, I'm
We're
going to
going to go
demand it
into
through a
recess.
FOIA
5 minutes,
requirement.
thank you.
We're in recess. Seats. We are out of recess. Alderman Smith, you could continue on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you have a point that I have been told that I am not going to get the data. I would prefer to make decisions on a data-driven basis. Since I am not going to get that data, I will have to make my decisions on the information available and resort to whatever resources I may have to force them to give us the information which we paid for. Thank you.
Is there any more questions for the Board of Education? Alderman Ward. Willis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Dr. Cutaia. Thank you, you, Dr. Cutaia, and everyone that came to this session tonight. I know the Board of Finance, we all know that, cut $1.3 million from that budget. If this board doesn't do the right thing and restore that money, what cuts are you looking at?
So we did publish that, and I believe it's on our, yeah, Mr. Archiola is showing you. That is available on our website. And in essence, you'll see almost a one-to-one correlation with the items listed in my letter as new improvements, systemic improvements. And I explained earlier, I think, that we were just trying to keep the system whole and just take a look at what was above and beyond this year. So that's the approach right now, but it's subject to change.
Thank you.
Alderman Vasselli.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Dr. Cutaia. Again, thank you again for being here tonight and obviously presenting a very thoughtful and thorough presentation to go along with the very thorough and well-done materials that were provided. It's my belief that you have provided all the information that I would need, certainly, to weigh how to proceed in this case, and certainly just want to be very clear that I am certainly in favor of restoring that budget. So thank you.
Alderman Merlin.
Thank you, through you, Chair Vitro. To Dr. Cutaia and the rest of the team, I don't have a question, but I do have a summary. And being in education myself, as well as in healthcare, it's a subject that's very close to me as well. And we're here, like we are for all the budgets, to learn. And the more we learn, the more we know, the more we know, the more we understand. And I think that you have presented that information so that there is clarity. I also know that we do look at assessments, and we do look at targets, and we look at how are we doing in those evaluations, and how we can then use that feedback to make changes. And I'm very thankful that you pointed out on the instructional coaches that, one, it's been in existence. It was conceived, if you will, with Dr. Fieser in response to a need. Additionally, in your assessment to maintaining a relatively flat line, you did what we do in education. We see the results and we look at how can we make the change. So I applaud you for actually demonstrating to us the process of what we actually do with results. And I'm very much excited about where all of you are good people with good intentions of where you're bringing the Milford Public School system. And I think sometimes it becomes a territorial thing of what we were used to when we were in school, and it just doesn't fly. It's just not the same world, and we need to let go of that. And part of your presentation has been to point out that we need to accelerate our learning. And we need to engage our students, engage our teachers, and you focus on belonging. We know through research, when people feel that we're investing in them, they shine. They put forward the best foot, and the outcomes are remarkable. And so I'm excited. You know, I've been in the STEM labs. I've heard about the world language. The sign language is exciting to me as well. I had a student in the past who had a client that was deaf and needed sign language. And that student went and took the course herself so that she could communicate. And I just think that the whole premise for the Milford Public School system is to help our learners learn how to think and how to work with each other to solve problems. And so I'm totally supportive of the educational system. My children have gone through it, many of us here have gone through it, and we loved it then, and we continue to embrace it because we know that we want to invest in the future, and our children are our future. So I applaud you for showing us the process. I applaud you for pointing out the details to help us understand. So thank you again.
Alderman Federico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to follow up on our Alderman Willis's question. So I've seen this list that you published on the website of things that are improvements to included in the proposed budget. And I think I understand correctly. So as we all know, the Board of Finance, people say don't say cut, but the Board of Finance cut or reduce your proposed budget by $1.3 million. It takes 10 votes from this board to restore that money. If that money is not restored, would the cuts or reductions come from the items on this list, or would they come from removing or eliminating existing teacher coaches, teacher leaders, or existing school counselors? So some of my colleagues, you know, there seems to be some question about the teacher coaches, and if that cut remains in place, would you remove the teacher coaches, or would you go to this list?
I don't really think that's a question we can answer right now, because
Okay.
the Board of Education needs to deliberate and decide. So Dr. Cutaia's recommendation was that we start with looking at the items on that list. But at the end of the day, depending on the outcome, the board needs to make that decision. So I really can't answer that right now.
I guess the question is, does the fact that some tonight have raised concern about coaches, is that teacher coaches, would you go to eliminating teacher coaches for that reason, or based on
I would
feedback?
not. I would not. So.
Okay. Thank you.
And Ms. Federico, I did make the statement that I'd like to keep the system whole. I'd like to protect what we have now. So that is at least an approach to the 1.3 reduction, albeit that could be modified, but we have a theory of action in place with the positions that you're talking about. So they're not on the list right now, so.
All right, thank you.
Alderman Beatty.
Chairman Vitro, thank you. At the presentation, I don't know which one, but when this question was actually asked by a Board of Education member, and you answered it very well to Dr. Cutaia and said, it's the beginning of a process, we don't know. And certainly, I think you don't do it with us. And last year, when there was a cut in the request, the question was asked about Harborside, and you answered to this board, right, that when that time comes, that you would discuss it with the Board of Ed and yourself, that's so you don't refer the mayor for that. It's the charter and the state agency gives you that. Am I correct? I thought that was a very good answer. Somebody said, would you be discussing it in which schools? And you said, no, I would discuss it with the board.
right? That's the place that is probably most appropriate.
Is it, I thought it was stronger than that, probably most appropriate. Isn't that what will be done?
It is.
Yes, yeah.
Sorry, I was trying to follow the line of thinking, sir. Through you, Chair, may I expand my answer to Alder Federico? I've had 60 seconds to think about your question. So there has been the conversation of get rid of the coaches, right? Like, not by me, but by others.
And to be clear, not by me either.
Okay. So I just want to underscore a couple of things. We took already existing positions. Like, we already had 2 coaches, and we took the 2 interventionists and made them coaches. So we did not ask for additional funding there when we made that model change. We did what we've been asked. Do with what you have, right? So we saw a different need, we went that way. If there, let's say, is, at the end of the day, a move to cut 16 to 32 coaches, that's less help for kids and teachers. Like, it's not going to cause us suddenly to go back to an interventionist model. Like, the cutting of the coaches, I don't know what that gets. Now we're really not supporting kids and teachers. Like, the instructional core now is even less supported. That triangle is less supported. So I don't understand, actually, like, get rid of the coaches, but then that means less support, right? And if we want to improve student outcomes, a key person to that is the teacher. Like, I don't teach kids. I can't improve a student score. I don't go in and teach first graders. But the teacher does. So if I want to improve student SBA scores, it would make sense that I help support the teacher as much as I support the kid. So the whole notion about, coaches are not student-facing, they don't have a class, let's cut them, but it goes against the characteristics of highly effective school districts. That it prioritizes professional development and of high expectations for all. And so I don't know what the cutting of the coaches actually does from the strategy of cutting. From the strategy of district and instructional improvement, it certainly won't help us improve test scores. I assure you of that. It'll put us in a huge deficit on how we now support teachers with the rollout of the science of reading in grades K through 3. That's a heavy lift. I'm just using that as an example.
Thank you.
Alderman Healy.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. I want to thank you for agreeing to meet with Alderman Marlowe relative to sharing the philosophy and garnering further knowledge for him. And it's important, a lot of the questions here tonight, we were here to focus on the budget, but there were other questions that, talked about philosophy and talked about programmatic specific issues, and I would encourage everyone to avail themselves of their counterparts within the districts on the Board of Education to further that in support of helping them to discern, get further clarity, because we have a very important vote coming before us shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Again, thank you for answering my questions. I will put a request in the email for that study that you had referenced, but I'd also like to add any of those internal analysis measures that you may be able to include.
That I may be able to include, so we'll take a look at that.
Thank you.
With no more questions, I will entertain a motion to recess until our next meeting, which will be Monday, April 22nd, 2024 at 7 p.m. We got a motion and a second to recess. All in favor? Opposed? We're in recess. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Cutaia, and you and your staff, and for answering all our questions. Appreciate it. Excellent presentation.